Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Bangladesh is the issue that's engaging our attention on Cut The Clutter today, or rather turmoil in Bangladesh. One thing I can say at the very outset is that in India, we can say that we can't complain that we live in a boring neighborhood. There is so much excitement, not always for the better for those countries, that's taking place in our neighborhood. So just at a time when Pakistan is having its own troubles, Pakistan Supreme Court has now legitimized Imran Khan's party, which the establishment plus the ruling coalition wanted to keep banned. The Pakistani courts have also now technically freed Imran Khan from all the charges he faced earlier, although the establishment and the government have again filed fresh charges against him. So that instability is going on in Pakistan, or instability is getting compounded in Pakistan at a time when Pakistan's economy is further gone into a tailspin. I mean, it's a serial, it keeps running like that. It's a sad, tragic serial for Pakistan, but that situation is not getting better. That is Pakistan. Then we see Nepal. Nepal has just elected its 14th Prime Minister in 16 years since it became a democracy. 14 and 16. See the story by Keshav Padmanabhan, who did a listing of Nepal's prime ministers. They have so much instability. In this instability, these are not 14 individuals. Some individuals have been prime minister multiple times. So Mr. Oli, for example, in this case, has become prime minister for the 4th time already. He's just been sworn in. So there is that trouble going on, or instability going on in Nepal as well. So one on the west, one sort of on the north, little bit on the east. To India's east is Bangladesh. Bangladesh is usually being stable. It's also the friendliest of India's neighbors. Definitely, this Bangladesh government is the friendliest India has had since the early 1970s, since the assassination of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. His daughter it is who has repaired the relationship with India. She was in India recently. She was also in China recently, and we know that she cut short her visit in China, apparently annoyed because she believed that she wasn't getting adequate attention, nor were the Chinese keeping up to the promises that they had made to her. And she also, first of all, cut short her visit. She also didn't like the fact that Xi Jinping wasn't her interlocutor. The Chinese had decided that the Chinese premier would do this instead. And when she returned, she also said that it will be India, not China, that will work on the Teesta water project. So for India, a very valuable friend and a very valuable nation to its east. I have said sometimes in the past that, look, it's so important for India to nurture this relationship with Bangladesh, because the last thing you want, you already have an Urdu-speaking, in fact more Punjabi-speaking than Urdu-speaking Pakistan to our west. Do we want a Bengali-speaking Pakistan to our east? We don't, and the reason we don't have it, and we haven't had it for 15 years now, is because Sheikh Hasina is in control. That's why it's important right now for us to take notice of the fact that her government has been shaken. It was only on 7th of January this year, just a few months back, that she won her fresh election. This was her 4th consecutive term. She won it. The main opposition party, BNP, Bangladesh National Party, that is Khalida Zia's party, they boycotted this election. So this was a bit of a dodgy election. I don't want to go so far as to say sham. That's what her critics say, and that's what also surprisingly and intriguingly a lot of people in the US establishment have also been saying. We featured this factor in the past on Cut The Clutter, that the American liberal establishment has particularly taken a quote-unquote liking to the Sheikh Hasina regime, liking I say in a sarcastic way. They've been targeting it, they've been wanting some kind of restoration of democracy as they see it. The counter question to that is, do you really want Jamaat-e-Islami to take power in Bangladesh, or do you want Islamists of various kinds to take power in Bangladesh, led by Khalida Zia's party or involving Khalida Zia's party? Anyway, those are other complexities. It is within all of these complexities that this fresh election took place in Bangladesh, which won Sheikh Hasina a fourth mandate. So she will now be, if she completes this term, she will be Prime Minister of Bangladesh, the leader of Bangladesh for 4 consecutive terms of 20 years, right? That is a lot. In the past also, between 1996 and 2001, she had a full prime ministerial term. So she has already been prime minister for 20 years. If she completes this term, that will be 5 more years, will be 25 years. Now, obviously, her opponents have become very impatient. They don't like it. And they've rocked her from day one. So as soon as she came to power this time, she faced an outburst on the streets. That was called the Boycott India campaign. That was to say, boycott everything that comes from India. That was obviously led by BNP, her opposition, which boycotted the election, and also elements like Jamaat-e-Islami, etc., because she's been catching them and prosecuting them. She's been catching them pretty much in the same manner that the Israelis now have been catching old perpetrators of Nazi atrocities. Even if they are more than 100 years old, they catch them, they put them to trial and punish them, execute them also. So Bangladesh has been doing that, and they put to trial many of these old Jamaat-e-Islami people who had perpetrated atrocities on people of what was then East Pakistan, Muslims as well as Hindus. In fact, more on Hindus because Hindus were specially targeted in that case. So she's been going after them. They have support from Pakistan. Many of them, many of the accused have escaped. Some are living in Canada, as you would expect, the usual suspect nation for this kind of asylums. So they are asylees there and running their operations. I think one odd is in America as well. So she's been fighting them, and they are fighting them on the streets because they can't find them in politics. So first they responded with this Boycott India campaign or protest. She was barely able to put this down or bring back normalcy on the streets, that a new campaign started. So this new campaign, which is now broken out on the streets of Bangladesh, and you can see pictures and videos as we talk. You can see videos on the other side as we talk. This is a campaign that mostly the students have launched in Bangladesh. This is called the Quota Reform Movement, or also Bangla Blockade. Now, what is Quota Reform Movement? In our subcontinent, in our country as well as in the subcontinent, our history is fairly new. We might be ancient civilizations. We may go back history of this 200 years, 300 years, if you go back to the British, 1,000 years, if you go back to Muslim invasions and Muslim rule, it may be 2,000 years, if you go back 2,500 years, if you go to Buddha and Ashoka. So that is the ancient part. But the history in which our politics is rooted in the subcontinent is fairly recent. For India and Pakistan, it may be in 1947, 1947-48. For Bangladesh, it begins in 1971 because that is when the country was founded. And country was founded when it was in the throes of the country has come out of the crucible of immense amount of suffering, violence, atrocities, and a full-fledged war in which its people also fought. India fought on its side on a very large scale, but also a lot of the Bangladeshis fought either as Mukti Bahini or volunteers or people who campaigned and actually people who resisted the Pakistani army and its collaborators at that point. Collaborators is important because we'll come to that point in just a couple of minutes because that's very relevant to what's going on in the streets right now as the students are protesting. So one of the things that the new Bangladesh government did in 1972, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's government, that is immediately after the new government came in, they looked at all these lakhs of people, lakhs of Bangladeshis who had fought the Pakistanis, either directly they had picked up arms or politically, or they had campaigned, or who had come to India, who had set up the government in a place that was so-called place called Mujib Nagar. In fact, if you go back to archives of Indian newspapers, a lot of the stories on Bangladesh are datelined Mujib Nagar. It was a place we know in Kolkata, we can say it now. It's historically a well-known fact. So a lot of people had participated in that campaign. Now, this was a very poor country. In December 1971, when it came into being, Sheikh Mujib came back. So one of the first things he had to do was to also rehabilitate and do something for those who had suffered in this campaign against Pakistani army. So the government said that 30% of all government jobs, it was a very poor country and a very poor government. So it may not have had many jobs, but it was decided that 30% of all government jobs will now go to the family members, dependents and family members of those who had participated in this liberation war or freedom struggle, whatever you call it. So 30% it was. Then what happens? In 1977, in 1975, Sheikh Mujib gets assassinated. That story we've told you before. She gets assassinated around the same time that emergency is imposed in India, and Mrs. Gandhi uses that assassination later to justify the imposition of the emergency, basically saying that what happened to Salvador Allende of Chile just the other day, that was done by the CIA. Now Mujib's assassination, who knows who's done it? Some evil foreign hand is involved, maybe the same evil foreign hand is involved. I had to impose the emergency. Nevertheless, 75, Sheikh Mujib gets assassinated. Bangladesh then has a fair bit of instability after that. In the year 1977, Bangladesh has had two presidents. The first president, who lasts up to April 21 of that year, it was in the year 77 when the Bangladesh government, although the country had two presidents, first of the Awami League and second a military dictator in Ziaur Rahman, whose widow Khalida Zia is now heading the opposition party BNP, who then extends this reservation of 30% for the dependents and family members of those who participated in the freedom movement or liberation struggle. It is now extended to their children as well, because some time has passed and their children are growing up. Then we carry on from there. Then children grow up, right? After all, if somebody was born in 1971, 72, 73, come 2010, by that time, many of those children have also had children. Many of the family members of these freedom fighters / liberation fighters also have grandchildren. So 2010, and this is when Sheikh Hasina is in power. She came back to power in 2009. 2010, she extends this further. So this reservation is also given to the grandchildren of those who participated in the freedom movement / liberation war. Right? Now it becomes a very large catchment area, because first of all, it is not as if there was a uniformed army. It was never easy to establish who actually fought, who did not. Even in India, even at the time when Tamar Patras were given out and pensions were given out to freedom fighters, there were issues because people came in with claims. However, the stakes were not so high. Stakes were just a Tamar Patra and maybe some pension. In this case, it was jobs for almost your entire family. Reservation almost for your entire family. 30% reservation is a lot. When this happened, this started causing consternation. This was challenged on the street. There were a lot of protests because this went on, and people said that this was nothing but Awami League's way of rewarding its own, because they could then say that anybody who participated in the freedom movement in 1971 was a worker of the Awami League, or today they could say that any worker of the Awami League or any member of the Awami League, their ancestors had participated in 1971 War of Liberation, because there is no documentation of who was there, who wasn't there. So lots of fake certificates were produced, and this became a gravy train for supporters of the Awami League. That was the allegation by the protesters. As these protests built up, in 2018, under pressure, Sheikh Hasina's government withdrew this reservation. Definitely they withdrew it for category 1 and 2 government servants, which took away a lot of the sting from this campaign, right? And this campaign had died down. Now, when she comes back to power, it's very important for us to understand the sequence. When she comes back to power, in January. On January 7 is the election this year. After that, first she faces the Boycott India campaign, which doesn't quite have the fuel to last very long. It is while she's still recovering from that and new government is settling down that on 5th of June, Bangladesh's High Court strikes down her government's circular of 2018 cancelling these reservations as unconstitutional. Remember, it is the others who were beneficiaries of these reservations who've gone to court and they win the case and the court strikes it down. It's also true that the Awami League government, while in the past it was their policy, they had withdrawn this policy in 2018. Now the court had struck down their circular withdrawing this policy. They went to Supreme Court in appeal against this High Court order. So it's not as if they were now backing this idea of reservations. But students got furious. Opposition parties were looking for this opportunity and that led to this trouble. This trouble has now seen all the educational institutions shut down. So many roads, highways are blocked. Government has responded as governments in our region, subcontinent usually do. First of all, block internet, switch off communication, clamp down on the news media. Very little news is coming out, although a lot of the reels and videos are coming out right now. And many of these can be quite triggering. For example, there is one of a young man with his chest open like this, walking up to the police, and police shoot him at fairly close range with a rubber bullet. And he tries to walk for some time and collapses and he dies because a rubber bullet may be a rubber bullet. But if it hits a person at close enough range and in a sensitive enough area, particularly the chest, the heart, etc., it can kill. So he dies. And these images have become now a great cause for provocation, and that's why a fight back has started. Bangladesh police, the army was called out. At least one news agency says the army was called out. By the way, AFP says that 32 people have died already. Another news agency says that the army was called out. Rapid Action Force, which is a very tough, in fact, a force called high-handed many times, they have surrounded the university campus, which is the epicenter of the protest. And all this stuff is going on and very strong statements are being made by the protesters who say that they want nothing less than a departure of Sheikh Hasina's government. That would also tell you that the other parties, the opposition parties, were left out, and also Jamaat-e-Islami, also the former sympathizers of Pakistan, etc., because they haven't all gone away. They may be in a minority, but they are there and they're very vocal. So they've also got involved. That's the situation right now in Bangladesh, which Sheikh Hasina is wrestling with. Now, while all of this is going on, in middle of all this, Sheikh Hasina makes an intriguing statement. She is holding a press conference, and at the press conference she says, and I am giving you the exact translation. In fact, you can read more details on it on an article that Deep Haldar, our columnist who writes about Bangladesh often, he's written. He's an independent columnist. So please read that column. I will share a link with you. She says, and it's the English translation, why do they have so much resentment towards freedom fighters? If the grandchildren of freedom fighters don't get quota benefits, should the grandchildren of razakars get them? Now this lit a fresh fire. Once again, we have to understand the history of Bangladesh, which begins in 1971. It's very recent. Who's a razakar in Bangladesh? Razakar in Bangladesh is synonym for a traitor, anti-national element, deshdrohi, whatever you want to call them. Because razakar is literally in Persian a volunteer. Razakars were people who in 1971 were like the auxiliary army. They were collaborators with Pakistani army. They were like the auxiliary army of the Pakistani army. Pakistani government, Pakistan was under military rule at that time. Pakistan had passed two ordinances, one in August 2 that year, and the second on September 7 that year, the first constituting the Razakars as a formal entity to work under the Pakistan army, and the second one making them actually a part of the Pakistani army. So, two brigades of Pakistani army usually had a brigade strength of Razakars, and the worst atrocities were carried out on everybody, but particularly on Hindus, were carried out by the razakar. So in Bangladesh, to be called a razakar is the worst abuse. So she said, if freedom fighters' grandchildren will not get them, will razakars' grandchildren get them? This was a rhetorical flourish which went wrong, because at this point of time, her government is in appeal in the Supreme Court on the side of the students, to the extent that they are appealing against a High Court order restoring the reservation. So they are standing in the Supreme Court against the reservation. Yet, in anger, she made that statement. As she made that statement, that got students and agitators more provoked. That's why a new war cry rose among the protesters. I am a razakar. All right, you call me a razakar? I am a razakar. In our country also, there was a time when Mrs. Gandhi used to say in early 70s that those who oppose her are foreign agents, are CIA agents. And Pilu Modi, one of our very cerebral opposition MPs, he walked into parliament one day with a badge saying, I am a CIA agent, right? So that was done half in jest, but the message was the same. This is being done in anger and defiance. So protesters are now coming up with saying, I am a razakar. You can see these videos. We'll see if we can find one. We'll run it for you for a couple of seconds. But you see these protesters, a lot of them women. This is in Bengali, so I apologize for my pronunciation. I won't get it right, I know. It's Tuike Amike. Who are you? Who am I? Razakar, razakar. Tumike, amike. Who are you? Who am I? Razakar, razakar. Ke boleche, sairachar, sairachar. Who are you? Who am I? Razakar, razakar. Who's branding us as such? The dictator, the dictator. So they are calling Sheikh Hasina as the dictator. So that's become the slogan now. Now Sheikh Hasina's people also are angry, because they are saying, look, this whole business of harking back to razakars, that is questioning the foundational principles of Bangladesh. Because if you can't joke about being razakars, because after all, among those who are opposing the government on the streets are also people who are razakar sympathizers. So once again, it cuts into the most divisive and the most disruptive aspects of Bangladeshi politics right now. Now people find a spark. Something becomes a spark, like this court order on reservation became a spark. We can see a more familiar example for us in Manipur, where a mere High Court order advising the reservation status, scheduled tribe status for Metis, that led to so much trouble, right? So sometimes these things need a spark, but spark can only light up a fire when combustible material is already lying there. Now, this combustible material in Bangladesh, besides the fact that all of the opposition forces now feel that they have no space in politics, they've been elbowed out. Some of them boycotted the election. Others thought that election wasn't fair and that election is not a fair way of getting their share of power. So that explosive was already lying. That explosive pile was already lying. But on top of that, popular disenchantment has also been rising because of the state of the economy. Inflation in Bangladesh has gone up to 9.73% in 2023-24. It's the highest since 2011-12. The country has faced balance of payment situation, current account deficits. Also, fiscal deficit has been rising. The country suffered also because of the war in Ukraine. First because of COVID, then war in Ukraine, because a lot of the country's exports, particularly garments, Bangladesh is a garment exporting superpower. A lot of that is to Europe. Now, Europe right now is punch drunk. Europe is in decline economically, and Europe hasn't been buying that much, particularly because of the stress over Ukraine and rising gas prices there. All of that has caused setbacks to Bangladesh's economy. That's why Bangladesh was proactive in last year. In fact, they did it earlier than anybody would have imagined. They were smart at this. And last year, January, they were super proactive. They anticipated the coming deficit, not fiscal deficit, but foreign exchange deficit. So they reached out to IMF and secured a 4.7 billion bailout from the IMF. This year also, IMF has given them, after another review, 928 million. So Bangladesh has been working on that. Their economy has suffered because of the twin blow of COVID and the war in Ukraine, because it is very much an export dependent economy. That said, Bangladesh is also a population that's got used to very high growth rates. Since 2009-10, when Sheikh Hasina took over, generally until 2021-22, Bangladesh has averaged about 11.3% growth. So good has this growth been that Bangladesh per capita income has gone marginally higher even than India's. In fact, if you look at 2023, although Bangladesh has suffered a minor decline in its per capita income in 2022, in spite of that, at the end of 2023, Bangladesh's per capita GDP was $2,620 compared to India's $2,500. Looks like this gap will now be met and India will go ahead. Next year, if not this year, I suspect this year itself. Pakistan, on the other hand, is $1,460. It's almost a half of Bangladesh. So from being a basket case in 1971, from being such a big quote-unquote liability on West Pakistan, Bangladesh now is a shining star in this subcontinent. And that's why Bangladesh is a country where instability is something that threatens the entire region, and where India also has a great stake in Sheikh Hasina coming back in control of the situation. And that's why I thought I will dedicate this episode of Cut The Clutter to our eastern neighbor, and frankly a neighbor that's of no trouble to India at all. If anything, it's our friendliest neighbor.